Good afternoon. Just a reminder, if you've just joined us, to sign in using the sign-in form in the chat box. We'll start in a minute. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our August NGA meeting. Thank you for taking your time to convene with us today. We are going to go over a couple logistics before we dive in. So as a reminder again, please do sign in using the sign-in sheet. I saw some chat back and forth about if you click out again, if you're having some trouble, copy and pasting the link might work. That helps us get a sense of what LEAs have been able to join us today. We also have a link to meeting materials that you should take a look at there. As a reminder, to save on some bandwidth and make sure this goes smoothly, please mute your microphone and turn off your video if you're not speaking. However, we encourage you to ask questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to either type it in the chat or to come off mute or come off video pending your preference and ask questions. We want this to be interactive. Another reminder, we are recording this meeting, this first chunk of the meeting. We will not be recording our focus group at the end to allow for a lot of conversation back and forth and a safe space. Next slide. We always start every meeting with a reminder of our mission statement. Helps ground us in this important work we're doing together to ensure that we are able to run a system that gives us information that helps accurately measure student performance, produces actionable data, and gives tools and support to all of you to meet the needs of all of our learners and to make informed decisions. We want to start with where we want to go every single meeting. Next slide. We will do a quick wraparound. Folks can come off video and introduce themselves. Many of you know all of us, but if not, we want to start by showing our faces and saying hello. So I'll start. Danielle Branson, the Director of Assessments. It's great to convene with you today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephanie Snyder, the Deputy Director of Assessments.
Hello, this is Daniel Alcazar-Roman. I'm Assessment Specialist for Science. Good to see you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Craig. I serve as the Assessment Specialist for Special Populations.
Hello, everyone. I'm Swea Hart. I manage the NAEP State Coordinator Program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deanna Santoro, the Assessment Specialist for Test Development, Administration, and Education. Good to be here with you all.
Thanks, everyone. So we have three big areas of focus for the day. The first is on assessment policy updates for the upcoming school year. The second is on initial preparations for test administration. And then the last piece, which will include our focus group conversation, is the assessment stakeholder engagement opportunities. Next slide. So let's start by talking about policy. So in this section, we're going to be previewing the statewide assessments participation and performance policy document for this coming school year. We're going to spend some time talking about alternate assessment eligibility and some activities and guidance around exceeding 1% threshold for our alternate assessments. So now we're going to spend some time talking about the participation and performance policy document. We want to start here fresh and remind ourselves of our strong commitment to having high quality and comparable measure of where our students are academically. We know that this information is critical for understanding where our students are, where supports are needed, and how we can all work together to address academic recovery. It is one of our only measures that we're able to look across schools, across groups of students in a way that helps us really understand where we can provide additional supports. We want to commit to you at the outset that we are going to be able to partner with you and support all of you throughout this process. We know we have had a challenging year and a half and a challenging set of preparation activities when it came to testing over the past 2 years. And so we want to be able to ensure that you have everything you need to feel prepared. Next slide. So we're going to start by previewing some pieces of the participation and performance policy document. The vast majority of the policies remain the same, but we're going to highlight some areas where they may differ. It is in draft form right now, and so I encourage you to ask questions. Our commitment to all of you is to get this policy out by the end of August. We heard loud and clear from LEAs that it's really important that you get policy guidance as early as possible in the school year. That was very challenging in the past year because of all of the changes due to the impact of the public health emergency. We know things may adjust and change as needed if situations change, but right now we are able to release information based on the information we have. So this piece wanted to start out front with. During school year 21-22, it's expected that all students enrolled in courses with required assessments will participate in in-person assessments. So they will be participating in person, unless there's an approved medical exemption for distance learning. For only those who have an instructional medical exemption that permit those students to participate in distance learning instruction, we are going to be exploring whether a remote administration with secure proctoring option may be available for PARCC and DC Science. If you were working with us last year, you know how challenging that is. Threats to security, validity, privacy, all are very challenging. We also know that our Access MSA and DLM assessments can only be administered in person due to the unique administration needs, the one-on-one setting, and some of our consortium requirements. So to synthesize, we will be having in-person assessments next year. We are working on what happens if a student has a medical exemption for distance learning. A reminder that a medical exemption for testing, that process is the same as it has always been, but is different than if you were exempt for purposes of distance learning. So what assessments are we going to be administering this coming year? We will have a full cycle of assessments. Our PARCC, ELA, and mathematics assessment. For ELA, it's grades 3 through 8, ELA 1 and ELA 2 in high school. For PARCC mathematics, grades 3 through 8, algebra 1 and geometry. However, we know that there are exceptions for students who take middle school advanced courses, high school courses. So students who took geometry in middle school will take algebra 2 in high school as that required assessment. We have been speaking about this for the last year, but confirming that this year we will not administer the integrated math assessments in spring 2022. Only 2 LEAs have used the integrated math pathways, and we have been communicating with them about transitioning. In DC Science, same grades as we have been administering in grades 5, 8, and biology. MSAA and ELA in math, our alternate assessment for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, will be in grades 3 through 8 and 11. Dynamic learning maps in science, our alternate assessments for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities in grades 5, 8, and biology. Access as well as alternate access in K-12 and 1-12 respectively. We will also have a NAEP year this year in grades 4 and 8. So I mentioned this a little bit on the previous slide, but our policy for students in 7th and 8th grade, if they are taking advanced high school math courses, they are allowed to take the associated algebra 1 or geometry assessments in middle school. Per federal guidance, these students must also take 1 mathematics assessment in high school per the federal requirement. That will be either geometry or algebra 2. So in this case, these students would not take the 2 required high school assessments. They would just take 1 in math. In ELA, they would still be required to take the 2 ELA 1 and ELA 2 assessments. We have currently this exception approved by the U.S. Department of Education, but we will need to re-up with the department to ensure they allow this moving forward. A quick highlight on alternate assessment eligibility. Mike will speak a little bit more about this later. Students with significant cognitive disabilities who are deemed eligible by OSCE for participation can participate in MSAA, DLM, and alternate access. Really important to note that LEAs must submit alternate eligibility applications for these students who wish to participate. And again, Mike will walk through this process a little bit later. For recently arrived English learner students, We start with the USED definition, which is a student who has been enrolled in schools in the US for fewer than 12 months. For the purposes of statewide assessments, we define this as EL students first enrolled in US schools within 12 months from the first day of the previous year's statewide PARCC window. We obviously didn't have a previous year's statewide PARCC window. So for the purpose of this year, we are setting that enrollment date at April 1st, 2020, which is very closely aligned with what the PARCC window would have been. And for these students, recently arrived English learners, they have an exemption if they are in this category from participating in and reporting out in ELA. They are in fact required to participate in, oh, thank you, Dominique, I should say 2021, not 2022. Not 2020? We will fix that before it gets posted. But these students are required to participate in mathematics and science if they are in tested grades, but the results will not be included in performance reporting. And we will make sure that date is updated. So it should say April 1st, 2021. Thanks, Dominique. Course repeaters and transfer students. This policy, much like most of the policies, is consistent with previous years, but want to make sure we're saying this for everyone. Course repeaters. Students who repeat a greater course with an associated required statewide assessment will retake the required test in the 21-22 school year, and the results will be included for participation and performance reporting. Given the fact that we had testing waivers in 2020 and 2021, it is very unlikely you're going to have course repeaters who took a required assessment. That being said, the policy does still hold. For transfer students. For students who transfer into DC in high school and have advanced past the required coursework and assessments, they do not participate in testing, they're not required. For example, if a student transfers to your school or LEA in grade 11 ELA and AP Calculus, they would have advanced past the requirements for testing and are not required to test, even if they never tested in DC in high school. They do not go back to take an assessment. Again, consistent with previous year policies. Mid-year transfer students. Students test once per content area per year. A student should test in the content area that best matches their enrolled courses at the school where they are enrolled during the testing window. If a student transfers in the middle of your testing window, we have outlined a couple different ways you can consider. If there's a unique situation where that happens, always reach out to us and we can help you determine which assessment is most appropriate for that student. It's a little more of the unique pathway conversation. High school semester or reduced schedule. Again, consistent with last year. Students who take high school courses with a required assessments on a semester schedule or a shorter will take their associated assessment in the spring. So for example, if a student took summer 2021, took Algebra 1, in the spring, they would take the Algebra 1 as a PARCC assessment because that was part of their required schedule. If they took geometry in fall 2021, they would take the spring geometry assessment. Students who take 2 courses with required high school assessments in 1 year are not required to double test in the spring. For example, if you took fall 21 Algebra 1 and spring 2022 geometry, you would take the spring 2022 geometry assessment. Secondary school and adult school participation. This policy was pretty new in terms of being able to articulate it clearly in the guidance, and thank you to all of you who helped us add additional clarity into this document. Students in the 21-22 school year taking high school courses with a required assessment who are on a path for just a regular diploma or an IEP completion, a certificate of IEP completion, are required to participate in content testing regardless of age. This is something I know we've been talking about for the past probably 2 years, but the language is consistent with the previous policy document we released. Students who are enrolled in adult serving schools who are not on the path for a regular diploma or certificate don't participate in content statewide testing. This may mean, based on their unique pathway, that they may only take 1 assessment in high school. It's going to depend on the standards they take in their classes. And any unique situations you may have here, please reach out to us and we can help you work through the selection of required assessments. For English language proficiency, we know that students who are identified as English learners, which does have an age cutoff in the 21-22 school year, who are on a path for a diploma or IEP, certificate of IEP, in grades 9 through 12, are required to participate in the ELP assessments. However, same goes for adult serving schools here. They do not participate in the ELP statewide assessments for access or alternate access. Assessment medical exemptions. You'll note that we're going to be referring to these as assessment medical exemptions because we know there is a unique process right now for an exemption for distance learning. Students with an OSCE approved assessment medical exemption will not be included in performance reporting or in the pool of testers for participation. This is again consistent. Medical exemption forms must be signed by a student's treating physician and submitted to OSCE for approval through the OST no later than 10 days after the testing window closes. This helps us confirm early enough on what our participation and reporting universe looks like. A little bit on off-grade and off-policy testing. So for off-grade testing, we know that students in grades 3 through 8 have to take the assessment for the grade in which they're enrolled at the time of testing. The only exception here is in grades 7 and 8 math, if they are taking an associated high school assessment. For example, a student in grade 5 is not permitted to take the grade 3 assessment. It doesn't happen often, but it does sometimes happen, and we catch that in data validation. Similarly, if you have an advanced student in ELA, there is not an exception to take the ELA 1 or ELA 2 in grades 3 through 8. The exception is only for mathematics, and that's per federal guidance of the Department of Education. If a student does test off grade, the student is considered to have not tested for the purposes of reporting. They will be included in the participation universe, the denominator, but would not be included in the numerator, and they would not receive performance reporting data. We call this next section off policy, but really is alternate eligibility. So if students who are not deemed by OSCE to be eligible for alternate assessments, but who take the alternate assessments per their IEP team's guidance, and that is okay to do, they are considered to have not tested for the purposes of reporting. Again, they'd be in the denominator, but not the numerator for participation. And those results would not be included in performance reporting. So what does the participation calculation look like? Here's the eligibility criteria. To be included as part of the participation universe, the student must be enrolled in a greater course for the required assessment. And students are continuously enrolled during the school's test window, or they're not enrolled, but they tested and received a valid score. No change in policy here. The exceptions are if you have an OSCE approved medical exemption and recently arrived EL exemptions we've already talked about. So, and these two slides, this is more for when we post it publicly, you can take a look at this, but the actual language for the participation calculation for grades 3, 8 in ELA, grades 3, 8 math or science. And you can see just what the calculation looks like based on the policies we've already outlined. Go to the next slide. And we outline what that looks like for high school ELA, high school math or science, as well as the participation calculation for access. Again, using the policies we've already talked about. So let's talk about performance. What does performance look like when it comes to the way in which we calculate it? First, to be included in the performance universe, of course, the student must receive a valid score. We noted this earlier, but students who take an off-grade or off-policy assessment won't be included in the performance reporting. Students who do take the grade 7 and 8 high school assessments based on that exemption for math will be included in performance reporting. And to be a part of the universe, they have to be identified as a participant. Students also must be enrolled for the full academic year for their scores to be counted for performance calculations. And that is at either the school level, the LEA level, or the state level. There are different requirements for those. So some other business rules here. It does say 2021 on this slide, so I'm glad about that. Scores of students are only reported at the level at which FAY requirements are met for public reporting calculations, right? School, LEA, or state, based on their enrollment. Recently arrived EL students, right? We talked about that. We're calculating based on the April 1st, 2021. EL subgroups, students who exited EL status in the past 2 years are included in the performance reporting for that subgroup, but not past that time. And consistent with previous years, the minimum number of students in a school and or subgroup for aggregate reporting is 10. So I know I went through a lot of that very quickly. There are not significant changes, highlighted the couple areas where there are. So hopefully if you have been living and breathing this and you've been doing this for a couple of years, this will all be consistent for you, or pretty consistent for you. But I wanted to pause and ask if there were any policy topics you believe needed to be added to the document based on your understanding of previous documents. If there are areas that may benefit from additional scenarios or additional clarity, and then any other feedback you may have for us before we post this. We wanted to share this with you now, a couple weeks before we finalize it, so you have an opportunity to give feedback. Okay, so I'm looking at a note
I
here.
did have one question. I'm sorry.
Oh, please go ahead.
Verify the mute button. So I'm just thinking about the students who started in the 9th grade, but they didn't have the opportunity to take the test. Would they then only take English 2, or would they be required to take English 1 for PARCC?
It's a really good question. They are not required to go back and take an assessment in a course they are not enrolled in. So if they are now a 10th grader and they're taking ELA 2 and they didn't take ELA 1 last year, that's okay. They would just take ELA 2.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I also see a question in the chat, and I'll read it, folks. Just to clarify, if we have a 7th grader enrolled in Math 8, they would take the grade 7 math PARCC assessment. But if they take Algebra 1 in 8th grade, they take the high school algebra PARCC exam. That is correct, and that is a federal requirement. So they have the ability, if they are enrolled in high school courses in middle school in 7th and 8th grade, to take those associated assessments. If they are advanced past 7th grade in the standards, but they are in grade 7, they are still required to take the grade 7 assessment unless they are taking high school courses. That was a little bit of a windy way to say the 7th grader takes the 7th grade assessment, yes, in that scenario. Other questions? Really quickly before we go into alt eligibility, just an ask for your outreach after the meeting. If individuals with their LEAs are contemplating expansions to your distance learning protocols outside of medical exemptions, reaching out to us earlier rather than later would be very helpful. I know that the public health emergency is ongoing and changing daily, but it helps us better prepare for all of you if we know any adjustments that are happening. So right now, again, the policy as it stands is that in-person testing, we're going to figure it out what happens with medical exemptions. But if you are thinking broader than that, please do let us know. So good question. Do medical exemptions include students who are under quarantine? So we are updating our medical exemption. If a physician says the student is not able to participate in testing, if there is only an in-person option, they cannot come, obviously, to the building. We will have to look into to flesh it out for the specific issue of quarantine and how much it impacts the window. So that's going to be this forthcoming answer. That's a really good question, but we're working on with front office as to how kind of those unique scenarios work. Any other questions? I see one more. Carrie Young, thank you. Would ELs take access based on their designations from spring 20 if no access testing occurred in spring 21? If the student is identified as an English learner in the system, yes, they would take access. So if their last designation is spring 20, then yes. All English learners enrolled in K-12 will take the access assessment. And for many of those students, it's the first time they're getting that data.
Just a quick follow-up to that, Danielle. So the benchmark assessment, I forget what it's called, I think WIDA model. So that assessment would have no bearing on whether or not a student would take access, correct?
It is not permitted as part of the exit criteria. Federally, we're required to have a common state definition of our exit criteria, and we use the access assessment data. yeah, the interim assessment provides a lot of really important data that can be used for instructionally. It's predictive, but it cannot be used for exiting.
Thank you.
If you do end up having questions after you think through all this, after you see the document, please reach out to me, reach out to OSSI.assessment, and we're happy to talk through specific scenarios at your LEA. Thanks, everybody. And now Mike's going to take it over for alt eligibility.
All right, thank you, Danielle. So again, we're going to spend some time discussing alternate eligibility process and exceeding 1% for this school year. So the alternate assessments that are administered in the District of Columbia are for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities who are deemed eligible by OSSI. Like Danielle mentioned earlier, we have alternate assessments in the following areas. So the multi-state alternate assessment in English, language arts, and mathematics, also known as the MSAA. That's for students in grades 3 through 8 and 11. We have our dynamic learning maps assessments in science, also known as DLM, for students in grades 5, 8, and high school biology. And then we have our alternate access for ELS assessment for students in grades 1 through 12. So OSSI will make the determination for students in grades 3 through 12. IEP teams will have the autonomy to make their decision or determination for students that will participate in alternate access in grades K through 12. But alternate access is available for students in, K through 2. And alternate access is available for students in grades 1 through 2. Next slide. So in order for OSSI to review students' applications for alternate assessment, it begins with documentation being submitted in Seds. That documentation includes a current IEP, and on that current IEP, the alternate assessment must be indicated by the IEP team. A DC alternate assessment participation decision documentation form also must be completed. That form is embedded in the IEP, and your IEP team should complete that during the IEP meetings. There also needs to be all supporting documentation that supports the need for an alternate assessment. So documentation should include a current psychological assessment, no more than 3 years old, any computer-based intervention. So if you have data from ANET, iReady, anything of that nature. Also, service provider observations, anything from a related service provider, such as a speech and language evaluation or behavior support evaluations, or any notes from students' observations, and then any achievement test data. Next slide. So to be deemed eligible for OSSI, in order for OSSI to review students' application, students must meet the following minimum requirements. So the student must have a significant cognitive disability. The student is learning content linked to the Common Core State Standards, Next Generation Science Standards, and the WIDA English Language Development Standards. The student also requires extensive, direct, individualized instruction and substantial support in the grade-appropriate curriculum. Keep in mind that meeting these requirements does not guarantee automatic assessment participation, alternate assessment participation. OSSI will conduct a review of the student's files and Seds to make a final determination. So it is imperative for all IEP teams to upload supporting documentation within their application to make sure that the OSSI can conduct a review and you have enough data to support the claim for an alternate assessment and the need for an alternate assessment. Next slide. So each year, OSSI releases the guidelines and the policy for alternate assessment eligibility, as well as the timeline. So our timeline, we see here our first activity of the deadline for LEAs to submit alternate eligibility documentation in Seds is October 15. So LEA should actually begin this process as soon as school opens. You should encourage your IEP teams to upload all supporting documentation, complete any 30-day review meetings, complete any eligibility meetings, any IEP meetings, just to make sure that the IEP is current. Following that deadline, you'll see that OSSE will conduct a review period in October through November. OSSE will send your eligibility determinations to LEAs on November 22nd, followed by an appeals window from November to December, and then LEAs will receive their final determination for alternate assessment participation on January 10th of 2022. So like I mentioned before, the alternate assessment policy is released annually. So the 21-22 alternate assessment eligibility process memo will be released to LEAs via the August 24th NGA bulletin, and it will also be posted to the OSSE website. So once that document and that policy is reviewed, share it with all of your IEP teams, your alternate assessment coordinators, and make sure they are keeping track of the timeline and the policy. Next slide.
Sorry, Mike, there's a question in the chat. Is it okay to share this timeline now, or is it embargoed until it's released via the NJ bulletin?
No, you can actually share this timeline now. This is just like a high level, but again, once you receive the policy and actually the policy document on the 24th, everything is there are more details outlined in that, but feel free if you would like to share these dates now, that's fine. If there's another question. If a student has previously been approved for alternate assessment, are all these steps necessary? So again, so if a student has been previously found eligible for alternate assessment participation, they will not need to follow these steps, but you will need to ensure that the student has a current IEP on file. Is the LEA responsible for uploading the documents, or is it on the student's non-public placement? So the LEA is responsible for ensuring that the IEP team at the non-public placement is uploading all supporting documentation for that student to participate in an alternate assessment.
I had a question.
Sure.
And maybe this was said and I wasn't aware, but what would be an alternate assessment if a student chose not to take the PARCC?
So again, it's not a choice of the students participate of what assessment they will participate in. The student has to meet the criteria to participate in the alternate assessment. So in the District of Columbia, the multi-state alternate assessment in ELA and math is for students in grades 3 through 8 and 11, and they have to be found eligible by OSSE to participate in that assessment. We also have, dynamic learning maps in science. That's our alternate science assessment in grades 5, 8 in high school biology, and our alternate assessment in our alternate access assessment is for our English learners in grades 1 through 12.
Okay, I think I got it, but I want to make sure that first alternate assessment is only for, I heard elementary grades in grade 11. Is that what you said?
Grades 3 through 8 and 11.
And 11, okay.
So again, the policy document that will be released on later this month via the NGA bulletin lays out all of that information, and it walks you step by step of the process and what students will participate and how to complete the application. All right, so switching gears to the exceeding 1% threshold. So due to COVID-19 and the subsequent cancellation of statewide testing in the 1920 and the 2021 school years, LEA-specific data from 18-19 school year was used to determine which LEAs exceeded the 1% cap threshold and therefore are required to participate in activities outlined in the district's waiver designed to lead to the district no longer exceeding the 1% cap. So the U.S. Department of Education released guidance that states cannot exceed 1%. No more than 1% of the students' population can participate in an alternate assessment. So in the District of Columbia, there are 8 LEAs that have exceeded the 1% cap in the 18-19 year. And so we will continue to use that data for this year. So those 8 LEAs will receive the alternate assessment based on alternate achievement academic standards exceeding 1% notification memo via email on August 18. Those LEAs will be required to participate in activities throughout the school year to identify steps that they are taking to reduce their number of students participating in an alternate assessment. All of those activities that they will participate throughout the school year will focus on quality and training and the alternate achievement academic standards, LEA oversight and identification of their standards, and addressing disproportionality in subgroups in the alternate achievement standards. All the activities will be submitted via the alternate assessment eligibility quick-based application, and the LEA assessment managers will gain access to the quick-based application on September 8th. So for those 8 LEAs that have exceeded the 1%, those LEAs have been informed. They were informed in 18-19 school year, but again, you will receive another notification on August 18th. And then you will receive access to the quick-based application on September 8th, so you can begin completing your activities throughout the school year. That guidance will also include all of the templates for your activities. We took your feedback and created templates for those LEAs to help them with the process. And we will also, to provide additional support, I will be conducting one-on-one training and professional development about alternate assessment participation and eligibility determinations for those LEAs. To schedule those activities, you just reach out to me directly and we can create that time and schedule. But again, on the 18th, you will receive an email with all of the information about exceeding 1%. All right, so if there are no questions, feel free to reach out to me directly and we'll pass it on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to take us into the next session of this meeting, which is some updates on test administration. We will be talking through several program updates. So as you see on your screen here, we'll review the test administration windows for 21-22, give you some information about testing roles and responsibilities at the LEA, give an update on the NAEP program, and some updates on WIDA, the Access EL, English Language Proficiency Assessment screening, and the WIDA model, which is the interim assessment, and then also an update on Dynamic Learning Map, or DLM, which is the alternate science assessment. Just to remind folks, we have set the testing windows for next year. This has been communicated through the NGA bulletin a few times, but wanted to just remind folks here that these are the windows for the various assessments. They track pretty closely to what the windows have been in the past. So as you're looking through these and determining what your LEA specific testing schedule may be, you can use these as guidance. And this document may be familiar to those of you who have been in the role of LEA assessment manager for some time, but for today, we're not going to get into a lot of specifics about this document. We'll cover that more in depth in our October kickoff of the assessment administration season, but just wanted to give you a sense of some of the roles and responsibilities of LEA and OSSE and schools throughout the assessment administration season. The orange boxes that you see on this document represent actions of LEA submitting things to OSSE. And actually the first few squares, the first 3 are things that we either have discussed today or will discuss. So the assessment administration season is not officially underway, but there are some actions that we'll be asking you to take between now and October, and we'll talk more about the LEA test coordinator selection in the next section. And Mike just went over the process for applying for alternate assessments, and then also part of the LEA manager identification process. We'll be asking you to identify preliminary testing windows that your LEAs may use for the various assessments. None of that information is binding at this point. We're just trying to get a sense of what schools are planning and when there may be some high volumes of testing. So right now I'm going to pass it over to Deanna to talk through assessment roles and responsibilities.
Thanks, Stephanie. So later in our presentation today, we'll be talking about some feedback that we've received from you all around many different aspects of test administration. And one piece of feedback was a need for OSSE to have contact information and really clear roles and responsibilities as early in the assessment season as possible. So on the next slide, we are going to go over the designation of LEA assessment manager. Each LEA will designate one person to be the assessment manager for each academic year. That person may also designate, and you'll see this in other places, LEA test coordinators for specific assessments. The LEA assessment manager can be the same person as LEA test coordinators for any of the assessments. So if there's overlap in contact information, that is completely okay. In the chat, in just a moment, I'm going to share a form to have LEAs complete between now and our October NGA meeting to specify who will be designated as the LEA assessment manager and who will be designated as the LEA test coordinator for each of the assessments listed below. There'll be one assessment coordinator for PARCC and the DC Science assessments, one LEA coordinator for MSAA and DLM alternate assessments, and one test coordinator for access for ELLs and alternative access assessments. Once again, this can be the same individual listed multiple times in the form. We just want to make sure that we have that contact information. In addition to asking LEAs to complete this form, we are also asking all non-public school test coordinators to complete this form no later than October 18th, 2021. In the chat, I have placed that form. It will also be included in the NGA bulletin that comes out next week on the 17th. And if staffing changes occur, the LEA assessment manager can update information. We also, in the spirit of listening to your feedback, applying your feedback, have done our due diligence to specify exactly the roles and responsibilities for the LEA assessment manager. And I have dropped that link into the chat as well. This document will be finalized and updated to our website, and we really thank you in advance, one, for providing us with feedback to get this process of collecting contact information off the ground early in the season, but also for filling out this information so that we can support you as you coordinate with your respective LEAs and non-public schools. And with that, are there any questions about this form in particular? We will dig more deeply into this information and the roles and responsibilities at our October NGA meeting. Thank you all. And with that, I'll pass it over to Suya.
Thank you, Deanna. We can go to the next slide, please. As Stephanie mentioned, the NAEP program will be administered during the traditional 6-week window. It usually starts the last week of January and it runs through the first week of March. For those of you that are new, NAEP will only come into your school one day unless there is a need for a makeup of the assessment, but you're only expecting to see the NAEP field staff in your school one day. The sample this year includes 40 LEAs and 170 schools with students in grades 4 and or 8. NAEP does not have a remote testing option. Therefore, NAEP will be working to identify students that are attending schools in person and or in a hybrid mode. The goal this year is to be able to report at the national, state, and tutor level 6 months after the end of the last administration. Next slide, please.
So yeah, there's a question. Have schools
Oh.
already been identified if they are chosen to participate in NAEP?
The schools have been identified, but the communication has not gone out. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so the program for NAEP 2022 will include math and reading in grades 4 and 8 and civics and U.S. history in grade 8. The DC students will only be taking the state Intuitive math and reading assessment, which is in the first column on the left. We will not be participating in civics and U.S. history this year. We do have one school that successfully participated in the long-term trend in 2020, just before school closures. And that school will also be participating in during a similar window for NAEP 2022 that only applies to one LEA. Next slide, please. In 2021, NAEP established a series of protocols to safely assess students. In addition to implementing those protocols this year for 2022, NAEP will be capturing additional pieces of data related to how schools are structured and student attendance mode. Some of the schools will be asked to document student attendance at various stages during the process, leading up to and including the day of the assessment. Schools will document any changes in logistics that may be related to testing limitations in the size of the testing groups, small group coordination, and if there are any changes to your school schedules, say for instance, you have a staggered lunch schedule. Those pieces of information are going to be vital for the logistics and planning for the NAEP field staff. Schools will need to outline their visitor policies if they have requirements around representatives needing to be vaccinated, and they will work to make sure that only vaccinated field staff come into your school. They're also going to want to know if you have any policies around having a COVID test done prior to any visitors coming into your building. So all that information will be captured throughout the preparation, the pre-assessment activities time. In addition, students are going to be asked on their questionnaire about various questions related to COVID-19 and how that may have impacted their learning experience in 2021. Next slide, please. So district notification will be coming near the end of the month. I'm currently waiting to hear approval from NCES. The Office of Management and Budget right now is reviewing all of the documentation that you see here, as well as the letters that we're allowed to communicate which schools have been selected. So look for that in the coming weeks. But as in past years, districts will receive their list of schools that are participating, that have been selected to participate. And then within a week or so, I will be reaching out to principals and heads of schools to let them know about their selection and their assessment date. If there is a need to change the assessment date, I would need the schools to let me know sooner than later. So that's where we're going to be getting that communication out within the next couple of weeks. Next slide, please. So what's next? Look for your district notification letters the week of August 23rd. I was told that OMB approval is expected on the 23rd, so we're trying to make sure that our letters are ready to go to districts. School notification should occur before Labor Day. The provide school information, which includes your contact information, school characteristics, your student attendance, and any, as I mentioned, visitor policies. We'd like to have that complete within 30 days of notification. So the deadline for that will be September 30th. And we're going to ask a little earlier this year that we have principals and school coordinators register in the MyNAEP system by October 15th. Even if a coordinator was a coordinator in the past, they are still going to have to register and create a new password for this year. The prepare for pre-assessment activities, we're going to have orientation for new LEAs in schools that are new to NAEP and new to the district. Those dates are going to be announced in our October meeting. And then there will also be school coordinator training, but it will be virtual this year. And finally, in December, schools will have access to the NAEP data management systems to start looking at the students that have been sampled to participate in the assessment. That's all I have today. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Mike.
All right, so we're going to talk about the WIDA screening process and the steps that LEAs need to take in order to begin their process. So this is just honestly a reminder about the screening. On August 2nd, the LEAs and TCs and TAs gain access to the WIDA screener for kindergarten, as well as grades 1 through 12 training in the WIDA Secure portal. The screening for kindergarten, in order to administer that, LEA test coordinators and test administrators must pass both kindergarten trainings within 80% or higher, and newly enrolled kindergarten students must be screened within the first 30 days of enrollment into an LEA. For the WIDA screening grades 1 through 12, TCs and TAs can view the WIDA screener webinar for additional support. New TCs and TAs must complete the training and pass within 80% or higher, and all newly enrolled students must be screened within the first 30 days of enrollment into your LEA. If you're a new LEA TC, you can contact me directly to have your WIDA Secure account created, and new LEA test administrators can contact their test coordinator to have their account created. So again, this is just a high-level reminder. This guidance and policy went out in the NGA bulletin a few weeks ago, but we just wanted to remind you that the screening process is now open and your LEA can begin screening students. If there are any questions, please remember to reach out to me directly about WIDA screening. All right, and WIDA model. Next slide. So in our last NGA meeting, we touched on this, but we just wanted to give you an update of where we are in the process. So we are pleased to announce that we are in the final stages with our assessment vendor of procuring WIDA model online for LEAs to administer at the beginning of the 2021-22 school year. The WIDA model online is recommended for LEAs to administer at the beginning of the year to students who were unable to take access in the spring of 21. WIDA model scores may not be used to exit students from English language services. In order to do that, that must be, we can only be done during the access assessment, but this WIDA model is an interim assessment and that cannot be used to exit student services. And kindergarten model kits are paper-based and can only be purchased by the LEA directly on the WIDA site. So this WIDA model will only be for students in grades 1 through 12 unless your LEA purchases paper kits from WIDA directly. Next slide. So LEAs that provided their point of contact information will receive LEA test coordinator accounts, and TCs will be responsible for creating test administrators accounts. So as soon as our procurement process is complete, your LEA will receive your test coordinator account information, and then you will be responsible for creating the test administrator accounts. And TCs and TAs will be able to view and complete the pre-recorded WIDA model training overview on the WIDA platform, which is approximately 1 hour. So I know some of our LEAs have been questioning about the training and how long it will take. But again, it's only a 1 hour training, and as soon as our procurement is finalized and you receive your account, you'll be able to log in and complete the required training. But in the meantime, make sure you view the additional training materials on the WIDA model webpage on the WIDA site. Any questions about WIDA model? All right, there is one question. So I received an email indicating that we are only going to receive a specific number of licenses. If there's a fewer than the number of students we have, do you have recommendations for criteria to be used to determine who should not be screened? So that will be completely up to the LEA. Again, we are providing this tool as an interim resource, and it's for students, that unable to complete access last spring. If you have more students than the number of licenses you receive from OSSI, honestly, we will leave it up to LEA to make that determination. All right, if you have any additional questions about WIDA model, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm going to pass it over to Daniel.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to share with you some updates on the DLM science assessment. Right, so this is new information. There's a new DLM district coordinator training, and as all the other training that DLM releases, it's a video that can be watched at any time. And this one is to help test coordinators, district coordinators, and data managers to implement the assessment for the 21-22 school year. This will give you an overview of the basics of the DLM science assessment, the roles and responsibilities of a coordinator. It'll help you understand the extracts that you can do during the administration. Also, after you complete the video, you can sign up for additional question and answer sessions, and there's a registration link that you can follow to do that. Actually, it's both for the video and the registration for the question and answer session. Can you go to the next? Thank you. And this is a reminder that this year, again, we have the optional DLM instructional embedded assessments. So these are assessments that teachers can give within a window as they teach, so they can select the essential elements of the standards that they're teaching, give some test lists to the students, and then receive that information and use that as formative to get information about how they're doing and to customize then their instruction. The window starts September 13th and goes through February 23rd. There's online training available through that link, and also we're going to offer a session in October for coordinators. But if you don't want to wait, you can go to that link and view the videos. Can you go to the next one? Thank you. Also, as every year, DLM opens their required test administrator training really early. So the training will open September 13th. It's self-paced through Moodle, and every administrator, as they are registered as a user, the information is sent to Moodle, and within 3 hours, they're able to log in with the same credentials, and they can follow the online training. And this needs to be completed before they're able to administer the test. And there's more information. There's a guide on with more information on how that works. Any questions? Okay. Right. Let's go to the next one. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. I am going to transition us into our final kind of chunk for this meeting, talking a little bit about assessment stakeholder engagement opportunities, and also talking about a focus group that we're conducting at the end of this meeting. But first, I will turn it over to Deanna to talk a little bit more about some test development opportunities for educators, and then and to also summarize some of the findings from assessment focus groups that we've been holding throughout this summer. And then we'll turn to the focus group for today. So Deanna, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. I have, quite frankly, had the pleasure of getting to know many of you through two different opportunities, one being our stakeholder engagement focus groups and interviews, but another being through our test development process. So each year, the OSCE assessment team plays a really crucial and close role in the test development process for both our PARCC assessments and our DC science assessment. And while we play a part in the role of the test development process, we know that the best feedback that can be given, and really the content experts across our assessments, are the educators who are working in schools, working in classrooms, and working with students. So each year, there is an opportunity for educators to apply to be a part of the test development process for ELA, math, and science through PARCC and the DC science assessment. We want to make sure that that pool of educators who are participating in these opportunities are representative of the district and really bring the expertise and content knowledge that are going to ensure that we have effective, quality, and culturally sustaining assessments. So today we are launching the application for educators to apply to be a part of those opportunities. In the chat and in the NGA bulletin that is coming up next week, we will have a link to an application to apply to be a part of the test development pool. If you know of any contacts of educators or school leaders who may be interested in taking part in the test development process and applying to be a member of that pool of participants, we encourage you to forward this information to them so that they can apply. These applications will be open through October 18th. Are there any questions related to the PARCC or DC science assessment test development process? Great. If any questions arise, you can reach out to me directly at deanna.santoro@dc.gov, or at any time you can reach out to osce.assessment@dc.gov. With that, I'm going to transition into a summary of the findings from our summer assessment engagement focus groups and interviews and surveys. Before diving into all of that, I just want to extend immense gratitude to everyone who participated in any capacity, whether it was an interview, the survey, the focus groups, sticking around today for our focus group. We really value and, quite frankly, need your input to make sure that our statewide assessment systems are meeting the needs of our constituents and, adhering to their intended outcomes. So to kind of paint the picture of where we were and where we're going, we began soliciting your feedback on our systems way back in April of this year. We started out with a survey, and this slide is the same slide as our June NGA meeting, so I won't dig into the findings from the survey too much, but I do want to highlight what from the survey really led us to the next step. So from the survey, the two big pieces that came out from your feedback was a desire for more transparency from OSCE to get information sooner and to have more opportunities for trainings and support. So after receiving this feedback, we did a couple of things. First things first, we used your feedback on the types of training and supports that you were interested in to pilot some events. One event that we piloted was the Introduction to Assessment Literacy Professional Development that Stephanie and I led back in July. And on the horizon, we have an opportunity for educators that we're coordinating with the Teaching and Learning Department on item writing best practices. That will happen in October. So we're really going forward with that. We also released policy guidance today in response to the feedback you provided in April. And we customized the topics of our focus groups based off of your responses in that survey. So in the spirit of transparency, I am going to review those findings. There will be a lot of information that is presented. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat because we have about 4 slides of findings that we're going to go through together. We can go to the next slide. So one piece of feedback that we received was a need for more clarity and guidance around non-public school test administration. So our approach was throughout the months of June and July of this year, we reached out to both LEAs and non-public schools and asked people to participate in interviews. During these interviews, we asked questions around process, and we asked questions around what challenges and pain points stakeholders were experiencing when it came to non-public assessment administration. The two themes that really came out of these conversations were around strengthening communication, both with OSSE around non-public assessment administration, but also between LEAs and non-public schools, and OSSE providing some guidance on how that could look. So some LEAs expressed that earlier publishing of policy information would be helpful, which is another theme that you're going to see coming up in a lot of these slides. And pretty much all interviewees expressed that there are barriers to communication with contacting their respective LEAs or non-public schools when it came to test administration. That is why we went ahead and shared out that LEA assessment manager and non-public school test coordinator contact information form today. The earlier we can collect that information, the better we will be able to facilitating communication between those parties. So the other theme was around test registration. So specifically around the timeline for test registration and how best practices to coordinate the various steps of test registration for LEAs and non-publics. There was also some feedback around some uncertainty from non-publics on which students need to take the access for ELS assessment. And so what we are going to be doing moving forward is we're going to be continuing these conversations, and we're going to be putting together guidance that better and more explicitly outlines the responsibilities between LEAs and non-public schools when it comes to test registration. We can go on to the next slide. Great. So in addition to our interviews around non-public assessment administration, we also held a focus group to learn more about your experiences as we prepared, but ultimately did not go through with the remote assessment administration last school year. So this focus group took place on July 9th and was open to anyone who is interested in attending. So from this conversation, we isolated specific challenges that were experienced with remote administration that we can consider if that ever comes up again, which we do not anticipate that it will at this time, but we want to be prepared. And also reflected on what resources we provided that were helpful. So some themes from those focus groups was that test security was a big concern of LEAs when it came to remote administration in the distance learning posture. There were also threats to student access to reliable internet and devices that brought up another concern with test administration, and that LEAs did not feel confident in our ability necessarily to resolve issues in a timely manner while administering assessments remotely. There was also a theme of issues around securely distributing student login information before testing and equity of student experiences as they were engaging in a remote test administration. We also heard from you that communication with families to build buy-in around remote test administration would have been really helpful, which is why we have our focus group today. Our focus group today is going to be specifically on communicating with families around resuming statewide assessments this upcoming year. So we would love to hear from you today as a next step from this focus group on what messages would be most effective and what types of materials OSSE can provide to help you as you communicate with families at your LEA. As a theme from all of these slides, needing information sooner rather than later was also a theme that arose in this focus group. But we did note that having asynchronous test security training models, having a remote testing supplement, and having flexibility around the test security guidance and testing windows was really appreciated. And so knowing that, we are going to keep that with us as we move forward with our policies and guidance moving forward. So we also had 2 focus groups last week, looking not backwards to the past year, but looking forward to the upcoming year. So the focus groups that happened last week, we're still digesting the information, and we will be sharing the findings in an upcoming NGA bulletin once we have those ready to be shared. But if you have feedback and you did not get an opportunity to share that feedback, please email us at aussie.assessment@dc.gov. I would be more than happy to set up a time to chat with you to hear your feedback. Or you can provide your feedback in writing and we can make sure that it's communicated with our team. After we close out our session and we stop our recording, we will also have our Communicating with Families about Statewide Assessment in 2022 focus group. Just a flag, we also plan to have a focus group in late September around the future of statewide assessments. And we want to help host some topic-specific assessment support convenings where LEAs can come together and share best practices with each other. We have had an LEA volunteer to host a support convening in November around LEA and non-public school coordination. So that is on the books. We're very excited about it. But if your LEA would like to host an assessment support convening so that there's a space for you to share your best practices with other stakeholders, other LEAs, and your non-public school counterparts, we would love for you to host that. So we'll be reaching out to you in the next week. If we want to invite you to host one of those assessment support convenings, that will be completely optional. But if you can think of a topic that you do particularly well, maybe that's the training of your test administrators and school test coordinators. Maybe that is your process for developing test security plans. If there's something that you feel very confident with, please email me so that we can set up an assessment support convening and make sure that we are kind of cross-pollinating the great work that we're doing at our individual LEAs to have the best possible assessment system this upcoming year. So with that, that was a lot of information. Are there any questions specifically about these findings? Thank you all again. We really appreciate all of your input. I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie, who is going to close out this portion of our NGA meeting. We're going to then stop the recording and then commence with our focus group.
Thank you, Deanna. Before we end this main portion of the meeting, I did want to share some news about changes to our team here at OSSI. Danielle Alcazar Roman has moved to California and will be transitioning away from his position as the assessment specialist for science. He's been a huge contributor and a very strong member of our team, and we're very, very sad to see him go, but very happy for him to start the next chapter in his professional life. Daniel, would you like to say anything?
Well, thank you, Stephanie, and I just would like to thank every one of you for your partnership, as well as science teachers and specialists in your LEAs. These last 4 years were really great, big challenge to build a new science assessment together, and we've been able to do that, and I hope things keep on getting better for science. I think we do have the position posted. If you know anyone that is interested and is knows NGSS and is interested in assessment, this is a great team to work with. You can share that information.
Thank you, Daniel. We're very sad to see you go, but as you mentioned, the position is posted on the careers DC Careers website. So if anyone knows of anyone who may be interested, please feel free to send it their way. With that, thank you all for your participation in the first part of today's meeting. I know we threw a lot of information at you, and we'll be sure to send out this slide deck and associated resources in the next NGA bulletin coming out on Tuesday, so that you can look at them a little bit more slowly and on your own time frame. With that, Deanna, I will ask that you close out the recording so we can transition to the focus group